Delegation at the Republican National Convention sounding off today about former President Donald Trump, his assassination attempt, and chances of winning in November.
And this includes former Wisconsin Governor Tommy Thompson, who spoke with us today one-on-one. Our chief political reporter Jason Zimmerman live in Milwaukee with those details and your voice, your vote coverage. Jason.
Cammie, the former governor, very energetic while speaking to delegates this morning at the GOP breakfast. Afterwards, I was able to ask him a few questions about Donald Trump's appearance on the convention floor last night and the upcoming November election. God bless It was this moment on the convention floor Monday night where Donald Trump appears wearing a big bandage over his ear that every Wisconsin delegate, including former Governor Tommy Thompson, now calls inspirational and a catalyst for political change.
I think, for how terrible it was for what took place on Saturday night and the near assassination of the president, that what really has come out of this is a feeling and a movement that we're together and we're going to start acting more civilized and more adult-like. And I think that is fantastic.
What does Trump need to say Thursday when he speaks for independents and undecideds?
I'm hoping Trump comes out there and says, for the grace of God, I'm here. I could be dead, but by the grace of God, I'm alive.
State Democrats Tuesday condemning the violence, but not sure Trump will change his ways.
We've seen him over and over read something off a teleprompter, but then within a few days return to form and go for some of the most divisive and angry rhetoric that any politician in this country uses.
Thompson Tuesday morning also speaking during a breakfast for the state's delegates, telling us it's the picture taken of Trump right after the shooting that could lead some Wisconsin voters to take a second look at his campaign.
There's no way that Joe Biden or a Democrat can win without carrying Wisconsin. And I do not see Wisconsin going for the Democrats this year. I see it going for the Republicans. Convention is here. Everybody's loving it. And Trump is coming off of this assassination attempt stronger than ever.
We'll know a lot more about Trump's future tone when he gives his acceptance speech, which is now just about 48 hours away. Reporting live at the RNC in Milwaukee, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.